Okay, thank you very much for coming back on time. We have a slight change of program in our panel too. Zarwana Rasa couldn't be with us from Afghanistan, unfortunately. Her flight couldn't be arranged in time. She was going to talk about a short film that she was involved in the making. We'll show 10 minutes of that film. We're very happy to have Najiba here with Ksrai. Najiba Ksrai here with us from Afghanistan, so we will still have the benefit of hearing about the women's situation in Afghanistan. So the film that Zarwana was going to show us was half an hour. So since she's not here, we'll only watch the 10 minutes at the beginning of it. It will give a flavour of what she's talking about. It's called Fear Behind the Veil. And after we see about 10 minutes of the film, Najiba will talk about Afghanistan. So hopefully this is here, and we can get it going. Can you all hear?
In 2001, Afghanistan became the centre of global attention. Shortly after the attacks on the World Trade Center in New York, the US and Allied forces invaded Afghanistan, ousting the Taliban and promising a new era of freedom and democracy. Women especially were promised an end to the oppression they had suffered under the Taliban and equality with men. Since 2001, there has been a great deal of investment in the country, with new buildings springing up and in some places a social and economic resurgence. And women's rights have been written into the Constitution, with new opportunities for social and political inclusion. For the first time in many years, they are re-entering education and the workplace. But 25 years of war and oppression is not so easy to wipe away. And for many people, the promises of a new era are not being fulfilled. Afghanistan is still one of the poorest countries in the world, and signs of poverty are everywhere. Unemployment is high, educational attainment is low, and the average life expectancy is only 45. And for the majority of women, life has simply not improved. For them especially, the hopes brought by the international community have begun to fade.
During the Taliban regime, women has been deprived from their own human rights. And after the 11th September, the door has been opened for women's rights solution in their social life in Afghanistan. At the beginning it was good. Everyone was interested to work on women's rights. And also kind of the authorities, high authorities in Afghanistan was really to have the contribution of women in the power.
If you compare the Taliban time and this time, we get success in our work. For example, on that time women could not work, could not go to schools and also hospitals and could not go out alone. But in this time, when the women came to our centers, now they are allowed to study, they are allowed to go to hospital, they can work, یک سلسله تحولات پذیرا شده، تحولات مثبت پذیرا شده. مثلا شما می‌بینید وجود فعال زنان بخونید در پروسه انتخابات ریاست جمهوری و همچنین پارلمانی، دیگه حضور مشارکتشان در پوست‌های تصمیم‌گیری شما می‌بینید و همچنین سطح آگاهی جامعه در کلش ارتقا پیدا کرده، فرصت‌های بیشتری برای زنان برای تحصیل، برای آموزش، برای مسافرت در بیرون از افغانستان، در داخل افغانستان این نمو نشان آماده شده. یعنی بالاخره علاوه به این خود زنها هم دور یک سلسله مطالبات شدن و حقوقشان آگاهی پیدا کردن و بالاخره خودشان به این نتیجه رسیدن که باید اینا نهادهای ایجاد بکنن که حافظ به حقوقشان باشه و بالاخره زن افغان در مجموع و زن 5 سال پیش نیست. امروز یعنی به حقوقش آشنایی پیدا و یعنی تا جایگاهش در جامعه پیدا کرده. به این اساس این چیزی که ما می‌تونیم که برای اصلی حساب بکنیم و این رقم رو پیش ببریم.
We have women sitting in the parliament, and they are sitting there with the men. They have been involved in the loyalties like the Constitution data and the presidential elections, and the general elections of parliament. And the numbers are really quite substantial. When you look at just, for instance, the ordinary woman out in the provinces who has, for the first time, voted.
اول باید خدمت شما بگم که پارلمان افغانستان به سال 48 سیت یا چوکی دارد که این توسط قانون اساسی افغانستان در نظر گرفته شده. از این دو سال 48 سیت 68 کرسی حضور برای خانم‌ها در سطح تمام ولایات افغانستان.
نامگذار نمانم ما قانون خوبتر داریم در منطقه. در این شرایط این قانون اگر تطبیق شود خانمان در زندگی خود حس خواهد کردن که دارای یک قانون هستند، یعنی بر زندگیشان اثرگذار است. اما چون این قانون ها در این شرایط در جامعه ما تطبیق نمیشه، لذا ما بهتر از بودیم که از قانونی که در لای کتاب و ورق گذاشته شده بهتر بود همین داشتیم.
The changes will not.
Sorry, I'll stop it from here so we can talk with Najiba, who can actually answer questions on Afghanistan as well. If anyone's interested, this is online and you can, we can give you the link so you can watch it. Fascinating insight into what is going on in today's Afghanistan. Email programs, unfortunately, we don't have Najiba's details, so I will introduce her. We're very honoured to have you here, Najiba. Thank you for coming at such short notice. Najiba is an Afghan broadcast journalist working for the BBC, and she covered Afghanistan and Pakistan for more than 17 years. She has produced and presented many series of current affairs programs addressing the plight of Afghan children and women. During her career, she has interviewed prominent world figures such as former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and the US Vice President Dick Cheney and Hamid Karzai. Najiba is currently working for the BBC Academy College of Journalism, where she is the editor of 30 language websites promoting the correct language for journalists around the world. She's published author of short stories for Afghan children. Thank you for being here. I'm very happy to have you. 10 minutes?
It might be shorter than that. Thank you so much for inviting me. Looking at this film, I think we are. The film was made a couple of years ago, still at the time when Afghanistan was full of hope, and we are comparing the last 10 years. If I look at the last 10 years of Afghanistan, we are comparing this with the blackest time for Afghanistan, the time of Taliban. Earlier, when Professor Afghan said that the dictators write beautiful speeches, or the dictators are not speaking. At least when they speak, they will not. They will sound beautiful. When I visited Kabul, Jalalabad during the Taliban time, I saw something which I never could believe. It was a decree issued by the Taliban, which was giving Afghan women the warning of for the first time, telling Afghan women that she's not allowed to leave the house without a chaperone, a male chaperone, and the male chaperone, even if he was 7 years old. So we've seen actually a speech or written text by a ruler where the words were not beautiful, they were scary. If I want to compare the Afghan women situation, I think we are in a better situation compared to our neighbors, compared to Iran and even the situation in Pakistan. As you saw in this short film, Afghan women were giving on the paper the freedom to take part in the political life. And 30% today, 30% of member of Afghan parliament are women, and this number is higher even than the number of women in the UK. And some people will say, actually, these women were selected or giving a quota to every province, and that's not the right idea. But in the traditional society of Afghanistan, maybe this is the only way to promote women. 21% of women in Afghan Senate are female. We have a first women governor. And I think the key law that has been written in the Afghan constitution was this groundbreaking law of eliminating violence against women, stopping honor killing, child marriage, and giving away a girl to settle a dispute. Yet in the last 10 years, from 34 provinces in Afghanistan, only in 10 provinces we can see that this has been implemented. And I think the main reason, the main issue in Afghanistan is tradition. I'm Pashtun, and we have a saying in Pashto that the Pashtun man believes it's half of the Quran and he rejects the rest of it. And when it comes to women's rights, he will not agree with half of the Quran. And I will tell you a story of my grandmother. She was born in 1902. Her name was Zahra. And she told me the story of her life when she was 5. She was one of the best in playing a game. It wasn't football, but some sort of game that she used to play in the street. And she said, no boys could beat me. I was the best. I was the fastest. And one day, her mother tells her, you're 7 now. You cannot go to the street. You have to be at home. You have to learn the cooking and sewing. And she said, I used to stand in the hot Kandahar summer behind the door and looking through these holes and seeing my friends, the boys or other girls who were 6, still playing the ball. And she said, I would stand there and screaming, pass the ball, you're cheating, for hours and hours. What has changed in that society? The age that the girl is banned from street is 12. In 105 years, that's what we've seen. A few years ago, I was speaking to a Pashtun from a tribal area where Malala is raised from. And we said, well, why you're against education? Why are you so much against education for boys and girls? And he said, you know, sister, if a boy goes to school, he loses his ghairat. He cannot fight. He will never take a weapon. And we thought that's exactly, if the education reaches the Pashtuns or the Afghans in general, then they will stop killing each other. When we spoke about women's rights, traditionally the idea is she's beaten by her husband, she is not allowed to go to school, she's not allowed to participate in life. When I was looking, preparing for this panel, and I looked at what is happening in Kandahar right now, they had a session on the 25th of November under the banner Stopping Violence in Afghanistan. 30 people, 30 women came to speak, and the main theme of the speeches there was stop the war. I think that's the main issue for Afghan women right now, that her husband is dying, her son is dying, she has got no breadwinner, and she is forced to take all of that. They were asking the Afghan government, the coalition, and the Taliban to find a way to stop the war. I think that security in Afghanistan is the main issue. Another case that highlights the tradition in Afghanistan is the story of a man in Badakhshan in northern province of Afghanistan. a man called Muhammad comes home. He's told that his wife is cheating, and he comes home and he kills his wife, and he kills his wife's brother, his brother-in-law. Now what happens the next 6 hours is very interesting. The police comes to the house. The house is a small village surrounded by the locals, and the police comes, and the moment they hear that he killed his wife because allegedly she was cheating, they just leave the area and they say it's a family dispute. It's a family issue, it's an honor issue. And I think that gives you an example of how what the Afghan women are facing. The Afghan Ministry for Women has registered only in the last 6 months 3,500 cases of violence against women. And these are only the cases that we reported. Usually, people don't go to the police if someone was raped or a woman was beaten. This is not something that you, and I'm sure my friends from Iraq and Egypt will understand that. The dilemma that Afghanistan faces today is, from one hand, we're playing with democracy. On the other hand, we follow the Sharia law. If you look at the constitution, the Afghan constitution, it clearly says that all the rules should be obeyed by Sharia law. And if you have a dispute, then refer to Islam. And then most of the men in Afghanistan even don't believe in half of the Quran. So here where the situation is for Afghan women. When I was looking at this film, as I said, there is optimism in this film, which was made maybe 4 or 5 years ago. Since 2007, something happened in Afghanistan, and I think Afghan women activists are scared that because of the political conversation and the political talk that is happening right now with the Taliban, the women freedom will be sacrificed. And I think that's the main issue for women. One example of that is in 2007, women's shelters were created in Kabul, only in Kabul and Herat and Jalalabad, in 3 cities. And these shelters were for those women who escaped from violence in their family, who left their husbands. Now, the conservatives in Afghanistan, right from 2007, were fighting this law and saying this promotes prostitution. And girls who leave their family, they actually go to prison. There is a special law for women who leave their husband, they go to prison. Now, the government tried to, or the women activists tried to create these shelters. So a girl who leaves her husband, who's 15 and her husband is 46, and she's beating, she goes to the shelter. Only 6 months ago, we've heard that the government tried to close some of these shelters. The shelter in Kabul is still open, but the one in Herat was closed. And I think that's what the Afghan women are scared, that if we extend the hand to Taliban, if we say, let's have a coalition government with Taliban, will we be treated as a chip of negotiation? I think that's the main concern for Afghan women today.
Thank you very much. I think we're dead on time. Thank you all for doing so well to catch up. I think we will have questions from Professor Akhavan as well. So can I ask my speakers and Professor Akhavan to come back to the table so we can have a dialogue, ask questions, and if there's anything from the floor also. I know I have a question for everyone. Fit in my chair?
Yeah, we were right.
Stay here. No, no. Bring on from the other side. We're just testing our wonderful camera.
To its limits now.
To its limits. Like friendly people. Can we ask each other? Yes, yes. Okay, I should introduce myself. I'm sorry, nobody introduced me, and I didn't introduce me. We were white. I know you're the only man here.
The persecuted
white. We promise we are compassionate women, we will not bite. I should introduce myself. Ruhi didn't introduce me. I'm Roya Kashefi. I'm the head of Human Rights Committee of a different organization to ICABI, called the Association of Iranian Researchers, and I was a co-founder with Ruhi for ICABI, which is why I'm sitting here. That's my connection with ICABI. And I'm also speaking in the afternoon, so I've got lots of hats today. Can I ask a question of everyone, and whoever feels like answering, please do, and then we'll take it to the floor. I'm taking advantage of my position as the chair of the panel. It's a question to everyone. It's something we've heard repeatedly about culture and law and culture. Which one comes first? How can we effectively bring about change? Is it by educating, raising awareness? We heard in the film that Afghan women have become aware of their rights, so they're actually now demanding change, which is a very hopeful, positive place to be. So, do we need to culture build first, or do we need to have laws and then time scale to reach the laws and culture build to do that? I know that in international fora, Islamic Republic, for example, constantly tries to legitimize abuses in Iran by saying, well, it's culturally sanctioned in Iran. Flogging is culturally sanctioned in Iran. In Islam, it's not a it's not a torture, it's a punishment. So this idea of culture is an excuse to abuse rights. How can we go about changing that? We're trying to have a conclusion out of today that we can put forward. So that's a key question for me that I always ask wherever I am, when also amongst such wonderful people with great experiences of different countries. How do you see it? Is it culture building first, leading to law change, or do we change the laws and then culture build, or do we do it two together? Who wants to go first?
I just
Yes.
give you a story. British historian Alfriston was traveling with a British Empire soldier, and in 1820, in his memory about Afghanistan, he writes this passage, how the society is working and what is the law enforcement, the tribal code. And he says that there is a dispute between two families. The dispute will be settled by giving away a girl. And he gives the details of what happens. If a man loses his tooth in a fight, then that equals one girl. If he receives a wound in his forehead which is not healed in a year, then the number of girls from the age of 9 upward will be 2. If he loses a limb in the battle, in this fight, then the number reaches 6. This was 200 years ago. Even today, the traditional code in many parts of Afghanistan, not only the Pashtun but also in the north, the dispute is settled inside the society, and one of the key elements that will calm the dispute will be giving away a girl, and there is a name for that, giving away her to settle the dispute. These people will not go to the court, they will not go and ask a judge, they will not appeal, they see the only way is the traditional court they have. I think unless they are educated, unless they see that this is the wrong way, you may have rules in Kabul, as one of the activists said, you may have rules and constitution written on the paper, but never implemented.
Okay, so you believe culture building first.
Education.
Education and culture building. Okay, who wants to go next?
We have the law professor.
Well, the law professor who's skeptical about law. No, I mean, there's a great book when you were talking about tribal codes of conduct. There's a great book called Anthropology of Law by Leopold Pospisil, and it was written in 1970s, and it was one of the first attempts at understanding informal legality at a time when people only believed in modernist conceptions of the law. The law is a legislature with courts that implement the laws, and as you point out, you can have really progressive laws on the book, but then you have a parallel universe which is completely removed from that. So I don't believe it's a chicken and egg question. I think they all come together. They all come together. It is important on the laws not to allow for honor killings. And by the way, I can tell you that in the English common law, there's a defense of provocation from the 19th century, which is basically honor killing.
Well, the
Basically
French
says-
had honor killing until about 14 years ago.
Well, yes, I mean, it's in all the European traditions, and to this day, in the English common law, you won't any longer have a defense for honor killing, but you have a mitigation of punishment. If you acted in the heat of the moment and you caught your wife in the act and you murdered her, it will be reduced to manslaughter, and you will get a much more lenient sentence. So we should be skeptical about how much progress really modernity achieves, which goes back to the faith that we have in formal legal structures. And some of the modernist critiques now are saying that, well, yes, we criticize patriarchy in traditional societies, but once you disintegrate the family structure, you create other forms of evil. And anthropology of law actually observes that the way in which law is enforced in traditional societies is through shame. And that is quite effective, actually, when, let's say, even the shame of a child before the parents. And we in our modernist haste, sometimes disregard the positive aspects. And that's why I think the sort of Middle Eastern feminism, broadly speaking, has a different approach, actually, to what I've seen certainly in Western feminist discourse. And it's a very healthy approach, which understands, in a sense, that the power of a woman, yes, you must be in politics, yes, you must have formal rights equally, but the power of a woman also resides in the family. And it goes back to the analogy I gave, the power of a mother, and how that affects people from very, very different walks of life. So all this to say that I think we need to try and change laws. In Iran, the example I gave, we need to go, you know, the film Back to the Future, we need to go forward to the past. We need to go back to 1967 to reclaim what women had already won. But until you have society in which most norms are really implemented on a daily basis in family life, at the workplace, not because every dispute is adjudicated before a court. And even if it's adjudicated before a court, if the judges don't have any understanding of the reality, if they still have prejudicial conceptions. So it is by necessity a long-term struggle. And I just want to end by one thing, which goes back to what I was trying to say, this sort of Macworld versus jihad analogy. I think that there is one issue of contested ideas of masculinity, as you put it. You know, what does it mean to be a man, and how can that be redefined? But another aspect of this infantile regression that I mentioned, that is about the assault of materialistic consumerist culture, we need to take very seriously. And I think that the assumption that women will be better off with modernization is not always the case. Look at China, look at India, countries which are modernizing. One of them is a democracy, the other is an authoritarian. But the disintegration of society, rabid materialism, the commodification of women, that creates different types of evil. And sometimes it's difficult to say, well, obviously, if a woman, you know, has to wear the burqa, and we have this stoning, and, you know, these very extreme manifestations of violence, it's very easy to say modernization is the better choice. But it's more complex than that. So we need to think about culture building. What does it mean to build a culture which is modern, but at the same time authentic, not in a traditional sense, but authentic in the sense that it recognizes human dignity in a deeper sense. And some of the religious impulses are not bad. Some of the religious impulses are good. People are saying, we don't want this Hollywood culture because it's oppressive, it denies us our dignity. So we need to figure out how to respond to that as well.
So you also believe that education and culture building first, and then laws or whatever will follow?
Yeah, I just think that it's not a...
It's not either one.
Yeah, obviously not, and they're all part of the same thing. The question is, how much faith do you place in what? And if I was to have to choose, which I don't think we should, I would say that you need the culture.